Good afternoon, Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com here with an important hurricane and Hurricane HD update on Hurricane Sandy. Looking at the forecast track briefly, obviously it's tracking through the Bahamas now where hurricane conditions are prevalent, mainly near the center. It's got a fairly small area of hurricane force winds. But you notice tropical storm conditions forecast possible along a good deal of the Florida East Coast. And then the track takes it up into the northeast part of the country where they are not used to hurricanes, and this could be a major problem. Looking at the satellite picture, you notice that it's not quite as well organized as it was overnight. There's an upper level low sitting over here that's imparting some shear across Sandy just a little bit. So it's having its chains rattle a little bit, if you will. It's being disrupted, not allowing it to do that efficient heat engine thing that it was doing yesterday and last night. But that's not necessarily good news, because what's going to happen is this is going to unwind and expand. So instead of having sort of a Tomahawk missile surgical strike type hurricane where the winds are fierce right near the center, it's going to be more like being carpet bombed, where you have a large circulation envelope affecting a lot more land and ocean, and thus a lot more people. Looking at the upper level winds, you can see this pretty sharp upper level trough sitting over the eastern Gulf of Mexico, and that's sending some shearing winds across Sandy, disrupting its ability to intensify a little bit. But the upper pattern's still fairly divergent around it, meaning that it's got fairly favorable conditions where it's not going to just be torn apart. Sea surface temperatures, this is really interesting. Notice this is the 26 degrees Celsius line, or about 79 degrees Fahrenheit, and then inside of that there's a little pool right there of 27 degrees Celsius, which is about 81 Fahrenheit or so, and that is fairly far to the north. And if the forecast track holds and Sandy comes up, around, and then in like that, it's going to pass right over that warm water pool. And the point of this is that it's got a lot of warm water to work with, unusually so for this time of year. And luckily, though, the heat content not very high up here in the northeast part of the country off the coast there, but still it's going to be leaving only gradually that warm heat content, and only going to spend a short deal of time, it looks like, over water temperatures that are not warm enough to support hurricane intensity. But I don't think that's going to matter much, and we're going to talk about that and why in just a minute. First, radar showing some rain bands coming into Florida, the extreme northwest part of the circulation of Sandy. The wind field going to expand. This is the probability of tropical storm force winds, and you can see that affects everybody from Florida to Maine. At least those areas are all within 5 to 10% chance of tropical storm force winds or higher. In some cases, much higher chances. A huge storm. Now, let's look at the discussion real quick. The forecast discussion from the 11 o'clock advisory. They mentioned how satellite presentation of Sandy has become less impressive. I talked about that on the satellite shot that I showed you a moment ago. But let's look back down here, right at this last portion. Yes, there will be some weakening. And you remember how I talked about that the circulation will begin to sort of spread out and unwind. So they mentioned this. However, during this time, the outer wind field of Sandy is expected to expand over the next several days. And Sandy is forecast to be a large cyclone at or near hurricane intensity through the end of the forecast period. That is very substantial, because it tells us that the structure should stay intact enough that Sandy will remain a hurricane-intense storm, whether or not it looks exactly like a hurricane on satellite picture. So the bottom line is, expect a large hurricane with a huge wind field to be heading towards a big population center called the East Coast of the United States. Speaking of that track, the initial motion estimate north at 14 knots, and they talk about how it took a little bit of a right-hand turn earlier this morning. But overall, the reasoning for their forecast hasn't changed much. But they talk about at the bottom portion here of the discussion that the ECMWF seems to have the right idea, and they mentioned that the blend of their forecast is about halfway between the ECMWF, which has been showing that northwest turn for several days, and the GFS ensemble mean close to the ECMWF ensemble mean. What does all that fancy jargon mean? Basically, a conglomeration of the models, the averages, all things considered, it looks like Sandy will take that left turn or northwest jog into the coast at some point near day 5. When it happens and how close to the big cities of New York, Philadelphia, Boston, that remains to be seen. But those areas could be impacted substantially by this hurricane. So let's take a look at the GFS, the Global Forecast System, the brand new run. 24 hours from this morning. This is valid Friday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time. Sandy up here in the northern Bahamas. Strong northwest winds wrapping around, bringing a northeast wind onto the coast. So the northwest side of the hurricane, you would have northeast winds blowing onto the coast of Florida. 40 knots or so, maybe 30, 40 knots. In 48 hours, Sandy moving a little bit more to the northwest now, bringing a large precip shield to the Carolinas, Georgia, with very strong coastal winds there, 30, 40 miles per hour, easily possible. At day 3, 72 hours out, this is Sunday morning, eastern North Carolina now under the gun of some heavy precipitation, strong north to north-northeast winds at 30, 40 miles per hour, probably close to storm force, 50 miles per hour along the Outer Banks, piling up the Pamlico Sound on the southern end of the region, the Atlantic Ocean to the east, piling up against the east-facing beaches of the Outer Banks themselves, Virginia Beach. I mean, this whole region just going to be pounded by this relentless flow coming around Sandy's circulation. You notice, too, that at this point in time, the GFS indicating some precip right near the center and a pressure of at least 972 millibars, if not lower. That's definitely hurricane intensity sitting over the Gulf Stream. Then at day 4, 96 hours out, I do believe, 96 hours out, where it looks like it might take that northeast turn and get on out to sea. Well, let's go to day 5 and switch perspectives to the North American shot. Here's the east coast of the U.S. There's Florida, and there is Sandy sitting just off the coast of New York and New Jersey. It comes up and then comes back to the northwest, and then finally at 133 hours out, let me zoom in on it, landfall as a low 950 millibar hurricane type storm. What it is exactly when it makes landfall, we'll let other people worry about that. Bottom line, very, very strong winds, heavy, heavy rain, storm surge potential over New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Cape Cod, Cape May, New Jersey, Narragansett Bay, you name it, Gloucester, Massachusetts. This whole region, millions of people going to be affected, it looks like, by a very powerful storm that right now is Hurricane Sandy. Will it still be a hurricane per se when it gets this far north? We'll have to wait and see, but a lot of people are going to be affected, and it's going to take a lot of explaining by weather officials to tell exactly what's going on, since it's not going to be your textbook looking hurricane, or so it seems. So a lot going on, and we're here to keep you informed on it. Hopefully this video helps with that. I am Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com, my website. Check it out sometime. I will have another video blog for you later this evening, so be sure to look for that in the Hurricane and Hurricane HD news feed. And we'll go over the latest information from this afternoon and what we know on the 5 o'clock advisory. And I will also talk about the field mission that I will be taking out to intercept Sandy to the Outer Banks of North Carolina, and then eventually the northeast part of the country as Sandy draws closer. So a lot to keep up with over the coming days for sure. Alright, like I said, I'm Mark Sudduth, HurricaneTrack.com. Thanks for watching this video blog on Hurricane and Hurricane HD. Be sure to look for another one this evening.